Good morning, everybody. It's August 13th, 2026, and right now, somewhere in the Secret Service's Presidential Protective Division, there's a folder that just got a lot thicker because in the last 48 hours, Israeli intelligence handed Washington a fresh, specific plot from Iran to kill the President of the United States. Not a rumor, not a vague, credible threat press release, a plan. And part of that plan, according to open-source intelligence accounts now circulating, allegedly included using a shoulder-fired missile to try to bring down Air Force One itself, and that specific detail is still unconfirmed by officials on the record, so I want to be straight with you about that up front. And here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. The president already knew something was wrong, because last month, leaving the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, Donald Trump walked out in front of every camera on the tarmac, boarded Air Force One in plain sight of the press pool, and then wasn't on it. He'd already been quietly moved into an airline catering truck and swapped onto a smaller C-32A jet before the cameras ever caught it. Air Force One took off as a decoy, and the real president was somewhere else entirely, and that's not a movie plot. That's the Washington Post and NBC News reporting this week on the record. Welcome to the video. So today we're breaking down exactly what's confirmed, what's still alleged, and why. And I promise you, this part matters. The timing of this plot lines up with something else that happened 5 months ago that almost nobody is connecting to it. Iran's own supreme leader wounded in the opening days of this war, and never fully accounted for since. We'll get to exactly how that fits into the 4D chess by the end of this video, so stick around for that. According to the Wall Street Journal, first reporting this story, Israeli intelligence shared new information with the United States, describing a specific Iranian plan targeting President Trump, and CNN and CBS both independently confirmed the broad strokes. This wasn't the usual steady drumbeat of chatter that intelligence agencies pick up constantly about Iran wanting Trump dead. Multiple sources describe this one differently, as fresh and as specific. And that Ankara plane swap tells you how seriously it's being treated, because that's not the kind of move the Secret Service makes for a rumor. Boarding Air Force One in front of the entire press corps, and then secretly switching to a smaller, less conspicuous C-32A before departure, using Air Force One itself as bait in the sky. That's a real operational response to a real threat picture, and it's not the only visible change either, because Washington Post reporting from just 2 days ago says missile launchers have been positioned around the president's golf courses. Think about that. The most heavily protected human being on the planet, and his protective detail believes the threat picture is serious enough that air defense assets are sitting on a golf course perimeter. That's a war zone security posture, not a Saturday round of golf in Florida. So why now? Why is Iran doing this in August 2026, months after the war wound? Down into blockades and tanker seizures and back and forth diplomacy over the Strait of Hormuz? Because Iran has never stopped trying. This isn't a new grudge. Go back to January 2020. Trump orders the strike that kills Qasem Soleimani, commander of the IRGC's Quds force, and from that moment forward, Iran has run a documented years-long campaign to kill him in retaliation. And this isn't speculation, this is Department of Justice casework. In 2022, federal prosecutors in Washington charged a member of the IRGC with plotting to kill John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, specifically in retaliation for Soleimani. In 2024, the DOJ unsealed charges against an Iranian intelligence asset named Farjad Shakeri, accused of being tasked by an IRGC official to surveil and ultimately assassinate then-candidate Trump before the presidential election. That same case involved 2 other men charged with plotting to kill an American journalist of Iranian origin on U.S. soil, and Attorney General Pamela Bondi's office put it about as plainly as the DOJ ever does. This man landed on American soil hoping to kill President Trump. Instead, he was met with the might of American law enforcement. And FBI Director Kash Patel added that this wasn't even the first attempt, just the first one caught in time to stop it. Then, in 2025, Iran's leadership went further than proxy plots. They issued an actual fatwa, a formal Islamic religious edict, naming Trump an enemy of Allah and dangling rewards in the afterlife for whoever kills him. And a fatwa is not a whisper in a back room. It's a public doctrinal instruction to an entire movement. And then the war itself happened. February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched a joint strike that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with roughly 40 senior Iranian officials in under 1 minute, according to the Israeli military's own statement, and that set off what's now called the 2026 Iranian leadership crisis, a scramble to figure out who's even in charge of the country, and that's where the second half of tonight's title comes in. So let's talk about the wounded leader, because the honesty check matters here. And I told you at the top I wasn't going to mislead you, so I mean it. Back in March 2026, 5 months ago now, not breaking news, Israeli intelligence assessed that Iran's new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, The son who succeeded his father after the February assassination had himself been wounded during the opening days of the war. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed the assessment at a Pentagon press conference, saying Khamenei is wounded and likely disfigured. No further details on the nature of the injury were given at the time, and none have been confirmed publicly since. So if you're seeing headlines right now implying Iran's leader was just wounded this week, that's not accurate. That's an old story getting recycled. What is accurate and what is new is the assassination plot against Trump. Those are two separate facts from two separate points in this war. And I'm not going to blur them together. Just because it makes a punchier headline, you deserve better than that. But here's where it actually does connect: the fact that Iran's own supreme leader has been operating wounded, likely disfigured, largely out of public view since March, while a leadership council scrambles to hold the regime together, is exactly the kind of instability that historically pushes a cornered regime toward exactly this kind of high-risk, high-reward operation. A wounded, insecure leadership doesn't need a battlefield win. It needs a symbolic one. And there is no bigger symbolic win in the entire Iranian playbook than killing the American president who ordered the strike that killed Khamenei's own father. So how does Iran actually try to pull something like this off on American soil? It runs through the IRGC's Quds Force, the external operations arm. Roughly 15,000 personnel whose entire job is projecting Iranian power outside its own borders through proxies, cutouts, and hired intermediaries, specifically so Tehran can keep its own fingerprints off the trigger. And that's exactly the pattern in the documented cases. The 2024 Shakery case wasn't an IRGC officer flying into JFK with a rifle. It was an American-based network, tasked and directed from Tehran, using cash, using leverage, using ideology, to get someone else to pull the trigger. That's the model. It's cheap, it's deniable, and if it fails, which it has every time it's been caught, Iran can simply say it wasn't them. And that's part of why this new plot is being taken seriously, even with some internal disagreement about how specific it actually is. CNN's follow-up reporting noted that some U.S. officials pushed back a little, suggesting there was less of a concrete operational plot and more heightened talk among Tehran's hardliners about wanting Trump dead, and a caution that the warning itself could be an attempt to drive a wedge between Washington and Tehran during ongoing negotiations. And that's a real legitimate note of skepticism. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist just because the scarier version makes a better video. But Trump's own response tells you where he's landed on it. Asked about it by the New York Post, he said, I've left instructions, if anything happens, to just literally bomb them at levels that they've never seen before. He also said, I've been on their list for a long time. That's what we're dealing with. And interestingly, he also pushed back on the specific Israeli intelligence claim in another comment, saying Israel came up with nothing. So even the president himself is sending mixed signals about how seriously he's treating this particular report, even while his own security detail is visibly acting like it's real. Let's line up exactly what's changed, because actions speak louder than press conferences. 1. The Ankara plane swap, boarding Air Force One, publicly then secretly transferring to a smaller C-32A before departure, reportedly moving through an airline catering truck to make the switch invisible to cameras and crowds. 2. Missile launchers stationed around Trump's golf office. Of course, is according to Washington Post, reporting from 2 days ago. 3. There's also an earlier incident this summer, separately reported, where the Secret Service investigated an apparent Iranian-produced video, narrated in Persian with English captions, that claimed to lay out Trump's motorcade routes and patterns, including a route from Mar-a-Lago to Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach. The video's own captions described it as based on the most complex security protocols between 2024 and 2026, decoding the president's routine movements, and whether that video represents real operational surveillance or Iranian information warfare designed purely to rattle nerves. Nobody outside the intelligence community knows for sure yet, but the Secret Service treated it seriously enough to examine it formally, and you put those three things together: a real-time decoy switch at an international summit, missile defenses around private golf properties, and a surveillance video specifically mapping motorcade routes. And that's not a security detail reacting to background noise. That's a security detail reacting to a threat picture they believe is live. So what is Iran actually saying about all this publicly? Almost nothing. And if you followed this regime at all, that tells you plenty. There's no Tehran press. Conference confirming an assassination plot, obviously. There never is. That's the entire point of running it through the Quds Force's external operations wing. Instead of doing it in the open, Iran gets to sit back, let the ambiguity do the work, and let every American headline about missile launchers on golf courses do more psychological damage to a sitting president's sense of security than an actual attack ever could. It's the same playbook we've watched them run all year on the Strait of Hormuz: say one thing publicly, do another thing through proxies, and let deniability cover both. except here instead of tankers and mines, the target is the Oval Office. Before we get to the 4D chess, a couple things worth knowing about the wider picture right now. Iran's leadership crisis is still unresolved 5 months in. The Interim Leadership Council formed after February's strikes has not produced full clarity on who actually holds ultimate authority and Mojtaba Khamenei's own health status, since Hegseth's March comments has not been publicly updated by any US or Israeli official. And separately, Iran-linked proxy pressure hasn't slowed down anywhere else either. The regime is still fighting a multi-front pressure campaign, the blockade, the Strait of Hormuz standoff, sanctions, and now this. Tehran is a regime trying to project strength on 5 fronts simultaneously, while its own top of the chain of command is still, by the last confirmed account, recovering from wounds sustained in the war it started this whole thing with. And here's the connection nobody else is making tonight. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. A wounded supreme leader, operating out of public view since March, commanding a regime that still hasn't fully resolved its own succession crisis 5 months later. And right now, in this exact window, that same regime allegedly greenlights its most serious, most specific plot, yet against the American president, that is not a coincidence of timing. That's a pattern. Regimes that are strong don't need symbolic wins. They negotiate from strength, they play the long game, they let economic pressure and diplomacy run its course, the way Iran's treasury-facing negotiators have been doing all month over the Strait of Hormuz. But regimes that are wounded, literally, in this case, at the very top, need something else. They need a headline. They need a martyrdom narrative. They need proof to their own hardliners, to their own IRGC, to their own furious population, that the leadership still has teeth. Killing an American president would be that proof. It wouldn't win the war. It wouldn't reopen a single barrel of oil through Hormuz. It wouldn't even necessarily help Iran's negotiating position. If anything, Trump's own words about the response make clear it would guarantee the opposite. But it would be the single loudest signal a wounded, embattled leadership could send to its own base. We are still capable of the unthinkable. That's the read. Not confirmed, not something any official has said out loud in exactly these terms. But when you lay the wounded leader story from March next to the assassination plot story from this week, and you look at how the security response has visibly changed around the president in just the last month, the plane swap, the golf course missile batteries, the motorcade surveillance video, the picture forms itself.